Joining me today here on this brand new edition of Kayfabe Kickout Audio is a man who has been involved in the professional wrestling business for over half a century. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, half a century. A man whose professional wrestling resume is literally 7 pages, which reinforces his knowledge, expertise, and experience both inside the ring and behind the scenes. The legendary Les Thatcher. Les, how are you?
I'm doing good, Richard. And you're in a part of the world that I enjoyed in 1970. I wrestled a season up there for the Cormiers, for Rudy, and I really that's beautiful country. I had such a great time, and so I'm happy to join you on the show.
Thank you, Les. It's a tremendous honor to have you on the show. I've been listening to you on the Observer and PW Insider for several years now, and just the stories and your, like I said, your expertise in the business. I mean, there are few in this business that I think, in my opinion, that can match your expertise. So.
Well, thank you. How much do I owe you for that? I have to send you a check if you want Canadian or American.
We can settle up later, and you can give it to me in Canadian funds if you want. So.
All right.
So before we start the show, I just want to personally congratulate you on your recent induction into the Mid-Atlantic Legends Hall of Heroes, and you're the very first inductee. So congratulations on that. I'm sure it's a tremendous honor for you.
It certainly is. I spent a lot of my time in that territory, and enjoyed my time in the southeastern United States completely. But that was a great territory, one of the very best. Right up until its demise, and in fact, my wife. I guess one of the highlights is my wife. I met her for the first time in Charlotte, and I'm looking forward to going back to that. Fan Fest is a great. It's probably one of the best I've ever been to, and honor, and I'm really looking forward to it. I've been down there a couple times. I was at the inaugural Fan Fest they had. I'm not even sure how many years ago that was, and then back 3 years ago, I guess. And so I'm really looking forward to this. And it's like I say, I'm humbled by the honor. A lot of great wrestlers. Yeah, that was a huge tag team territory. Up until the change in the guard, so to speak, as after Jim Crockett Sr. passed away, and the Jim Jr. and the rest of the family took over, that George Decker was out as Booker, and George Scott came in as Booker, a Canadian, by the way.
Yes.
And basically changed it from a major tag. I mean, when I first went there the first time in 1963, that was, virtually almost every main event, unless it was a world title, heavyweight title, or their singles title, were tag team matches. And usually, you say with a five match card, 2 of the matches would be tags. In fact, probably if you listed the top 15 tag teams in the country, I would guess that half of them would have probably been the Carolinas at that time. And then George made the change and featured more single wrestlers from that point forward. But yeah, it was a great place to learn as well, and really enjoyed my time there.
So the Mid-Atlantic Legends, it was formerly called the NWA Legends Fan Fest, correct?
Right, yeah, absolutely. And I guess there was some dispute there when the NWA changed hands. I'm not sure exactly what that was all about. But, I think, Richard, it was that the NWA was so immersed in that area that, and when I say I've been to a couple of these fan fests before, it's amazing because a lot of the older fans, people that came to the matches when I was there in the 60s and 70s, show up for these things, and it's kind of like Old Home Week. And I've mentioned a couple times that I think a lot of people still will probably call it the NWA Fan Fest or whatever. But yeah, Mid-Atlantic, the NWA logo is no longer being used, but I think, historically, or if you've spent time there, you still, the strong identification is with the National Wrestling Alliance.
Absolutely. And it seems like the last decade or so, there's been a lot of issues between the NWA and various promotions, like the prime example being TNA, and some other former NWA promotions have are no longer part of the NWA. So there seems to be a lot going on in that aspect.
Well, let's be quite frank here, and if I'm nothing else, I'm usually blunt, sometimes to a fault. But the NWA is no longer what it. I mean, you got to realize back when I started wrestling in 1960. My first match, July the 4th, 1960. The NWA was, I mean, the NWA had affiliates all over the world, not just in North America, and probably the biggest territories were NWA affiliates at the time, and there was, there's a lot of power there, and of course there are no large, I mean, with the exception of WWE and TNA, a very distant second, and then maybe ROH, you would figure, as a distant third. There are no major territories any longer, so the yardstick now by which most the casual fans of the general public perceives professional wrestling is the WWE. But the NWA at that time was major, and in fact, we undertook at the Crockett organization in Charlotte in either 75 or 76, and we did a NWA magazine out of that office, which covered all the affiliates, and that was a huge undertaking. But the landscape of the wrestling business in general obviously has changed tremendously, and not all for the good, because the territories were a good, a learning experience for everybody. I mean, as I said, I started in 1960 in a very small, I guess you would call an independent at the time. There was no television, based out of Boston, Mass. Tony Santos' promotion, and but from that point forward, every time I went to a different territory, it was like going to a new school, because you had so many veterans to learn from, and so many different. I mean, and pick up a little something different in each stop along the way. Styles varied from territory to territory, so it was a great learning experience. And the young wrestlers today do not have that opportunity. In fact, I think one of the I was part of the WWE developmental for a while, and but even there, you can have the best trainer, but if you're still working with a guy that is your equal in terms of experience, then it's hard to progress in there. You need to test yourself all the time, and of course, that was one of the things that we were able to do as young guys. Is you get put in with a guy with 20 years experience or whatever, can you step up and move on and be better? And of course, a lot of the younger guys don't have the opportunity to try that anymore. It's a tougher atmosphere, a tougher landscape now than it was back then.
Yeah, no, it certainly is, because like you said, the territories are they're non-existent, and WWE has NXT and TNA has OVW, but aside from that, like, if you want to gain experience, you have to wrestle in small indie promotions, and you could be wrestling in indie promotions for 15, 20 years before you even get noticed by the WWE.
And you still may not know what you're doing. There's the problem. There are too many, and I'm pseudo trainers, and I probably am stepping on some toes, and some people may be listening to this, and if I am, so be it. You can't teach what you've never done. I've watched a lot of doctor shows, but I can't perform brain surgery. You can watch, you can sit and watch Major League Hockey, the NHL, and say you played Pee-wee hockey, but that doesn't mean you can teach someone at a level where they will be capable of playing in the NHL.
That's right.
And that's the problem today. I still do camps. Well, in fact, I was in Western Canada last September for Vance, Nevada. We're up in Edmonton. And which the amazing thing, the difference than doing a lot of stuff down here, it was based more on old school style, which I really liked. It was easy to work with those kids. But the problem is, it's the blind leading the blind too often. And the problem when I do these camps, and I've done them all over the country here for the last few years, is someone will say, I no longer ask how long you've been wrestling, more like how many matches have you had, because so many of these guys only get to wrestle once a week or once a month. Cannot learn this business proficiently at that. It's got to be repetitious over and over. One of the things that created the great workers of the 60s and 70s, and I feel so blessed to have been a part of that because there were so many great guys to learn from, is that we wrestled 6 nights, 7 nights a week sometimes. So it's my example. A lot of times when I talk to the young guys, so if you go to Las Vegas and go to one of the floor shows, those dancers probably do those shows twice a night.
Mm-hmm.
But then the next afternoon, you go into that showroom and you'll see them practicing the same thing they did the night before that they're going to do that night as well. And you cannot become proficient at this without doing it on a regular basis. And plus, you have to be able to work with people who have been where you want to go. And there's not that many good trainers out there. J.J. Dillon makes a statement all the time that when our generation stops training, it's over.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and honestly, I can only name you a couple guys under the age of 40 that I would even entrust a young athlete to say, this guy can train you, because too many times you're going to teach what you see on television, and that's not the fundamentals or the foundation of the industry. So it's a tough landscape. It's tough I think even WWE's realizing now that they've got some tremendous athletes, some good acrobats, but they don't have a lot of good workers. And there's a big difference between being an acrobat and a worker, or an entertainer and a worker, And so that's the problem now. And like I say, I go to some of these, and somebody will say, "Well, I've been in the business 5 years." And the amazing thing is that after we do a Saturday, Sunday training session for 2 full days, at the end of that, they basically are just beginning to learn actually the psychology and the timing and the pacing of the industry. Because, a good wrestling match, Richard, believe it or not, and you're going to laugh when I say this, but it's a great analogy. It's like good sex. It begins with foreplay and ends with a climax.
Absolutely.
Or, for that matter, a good movie or a good television show is a story. You are a physical book. And when I see some of these guys going 100 miles an hour, you can't read a book that fast and actually absorb the story and the content. And so the artistry of our industry is fading, because there's a lot of, like I say, a lot of good acrobats, a lot of good athletes, but the amount of good workers become fewer and fewer, because it's timing, pacing, psychology, facial expression, body language, all of that comes into play. And it's a tough art to learn, even when you have some great teachers. But when that's not available, then I see a lot of independents that are hobbyists.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the 2 guys that rent a golf cart and grab a 6-pack and go out and hit the ball around and have a few beers on the weekend. Well, that you could call them golfers, but they're never going to be at the level of Tiger Woods, or a professional golfer.
That's
There's
right.
a lot of guys on the independents that do it as a hobby, but will never reach the level where they can go to WWE or to TNA.
Absolutely. And you hit the nail right on the head when you mentioned storytelling, because I find in the WWE, like the last 10, 15 years, that even in the average novel, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in professional wrestling with storylines, you have to have the same thing. But I find in WWE that they have a beginning, sometimes a middle, but very, very rarely an end to a storyline.
Yeah. Well, one of your countrymen is probably one of the most sound performers. Of course, he's out on tour with his band now, is Chris Jericho.
Yes.
But Jericho is so talented and so understanding of the business that he can go out and put younger guys over without harming his own reputation. That, again, is an art within itself. It's tough for the guys to fathom that. And as you mentioned, it is a story. So often, you see guys start with doing all these high spots, all these big bumps, but they're meaningless. It's almost just an exchange. You do a big move, I'll do a big move. You do a big, well, there's no story to that. People talk about great comebacks. Why did Shawn Michaels have such great comebacks? Why did Ricky Steamboat have such great comebacks? Because they went away, because they sold for the heel, because they took the time. They didn't exchange move. It was, the baby face was in the grasp of the heel, and, the fans that are behind that baby face, it's, then they're, oh my God, my guy's going to lose. And then as he starts that slow comeback, not the John Cena style that goes from 0 to 100 in 1 second. And when I say that, I like John as a person. I've worked with John when he was in OVW. But John's a great guy, and what he does for Make-A-Wish Foundation is unparalleled for guy. I mean, more props to him for that. But, if I were listing the top 50 technical wrestlers that I've seen in the last 53 years, he couldn't make the cut. And I don't mean that as an insult. He's drawing a lot of money for the company, but he's not the guy that you want to pattern yourself at after as a worker. If it's more a Jericho or a Randy Orton, those type of guys. Or, well, if you look at WrestleMania's coming up, Rock is a tremendous personality, has tremendous timing, and obviously has a great look. But he and Cena aren't going to, they'll get a reaction, but it won't be technically a masterpiece. Truthfully, one of the smartest wrestlers on that roster is The Undertaker, because Mark is not, for his size, he's limited physically, regardless of his age. But he, over the years, has learned to understand psychology and timing and pacing. And it's not how much you do, but when you do it. And honestly, the last number of years, his match with Triple H, his matches with Michaels match with Flair, those have been the highlight of the WrestleManias. Everything else just happened to be there. Mm-hmm. I know last year I said those guys, he and Triple H should have gone on last because nobody was going to be able to follow him, mm-hmm. and they didn't. So, that's the thing. The foundation that we used 50 years ago or 40 years ago hasn't changed. It's just that so many kids aren't taught that foundation. They're taught how to do a quadruple somersault or dive through the ropes or, the big whee moves before they even know how to sell or how to work. And the same goes, the true artistry of this business is to call it in the ring. And last year at the Cauliflower Alley Club in Las Vegas, Steve Austin, Ricky Steamboat, and Jim Ross, all three at different times during the convention, made the same comment using maybe different words. But the point was, if you lay out your entire match in the dressing room, do us a favor and don't call yourself a professional wrestler. Huh. And I would agree with that. It's not, there's no art to that. There is no art to that. I wouldn't know how to do that. I mean, I couldn't lay out a 5-minute match step by step. Maybe you think because of my advanced age, but I'm not sure I could have done that when I was 30. Mm-hmm. We get a finish. To go 3 falls, you get 3 finishes, and you're going to go 45 minutes or 40 minutes or 30 minutes. You build the match out there. Here, again, excuse me, we were making a joke down at the Mobile at the Gulf Coast Wrestlers Union. Somebody says, Les, you use a lot of sexual analogies, when you're doing your camps. And I said, well, I do, and here's the reason. If I just talk technicalities in wrestling to some of these young guys, they may get bored. The minute I say sex, their ears pop up, right? And they're listening.
Well, exactly.
But, it's like this. You wouldn't, if you're married or have a living girlfriend or whatever the case, this woman intimately. Now, you would not say, honey, tonight let's make love, and now I'm going to do this, and when I do that, you moan, and then you'll do this. And then, and when I mention it at these camps, the guys start to smile, and they cover it like that. I said, no, go ahead and laugh. It is funny. Yeah. It's meant to be funny, but it's also meant to make a point. You wouldn't dare lay out your love-making to a woman that you know intimately. You know her favorite color, her favorite food, and so forth and so on. However, tomorrow night, you're going to sit in a dressing room somewhere, and lay out a match with some guy for people you've never met before in your life. You've got to be able to go in there and be able to adjust, because, you and I could have a great match in Halifax tonight and blow the roof off the building, go to Moncton tomorrow night, and the people fall asleep at it. Now, we don't care if they fall asleep, then we can go ahead and do what we were doing in Halifax. But if we care, if we're professionals, we've got to shift and make adjustments. And if you can't do that that's one of the things that in my school is everyone was taught to call their match in the ring. Now, I don't care. I realize in WWE, because of all the cameras and this and that and the other thing, they add, and of course the matches are short, so they ask the guys to lay up, the shorter matches out. But I can guarantee you, like when Punk and Cena went, was it Punk and Cena? Yeah, the other night had such a great match.
Mm-hmm.
Punk probably called that for the most part in the ring. You got to be able to do that. Plus, humans make mistakes. Let's say you and I are having a match tonight. We're going 15 minutes, and the finish has you going to the top rope for some elaborate move. Well, let's say 5 minutes into that 15, you pop a hamstring. Not bad enough that we can't go, but bad enough you can't climb to that top rope. If we don't know how to shift gears, change the finish, we're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's so important to know how to call a match in the ring, whether that's, like I say, if you go to WWE, you do what they ask you to do. It's a business, and you're getting paid to do what they ask you to do. But again, you can go out, you can make a mistake there, and if you don't know how to adjust on that mistake, you're in trouble.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, it's frustrating to watch like professional wrestling in 2013 because like everything that you've just said, like the old school aspects are like literally not there. And Bret Hart in his book in 2009, he mentioned the same thing, that he was wrestling his match with Ric Flair the first time he got the WWF title, and he hurt his ankle and he dislocated a knuckle, but he had to keep going. Like he couldn't just say to Flair, okay, I got to stop, I'm hurt. So.
But they had to adjust to that, and there were things they were unable to do, that they might have considered doing again. I'll tell you what, I've done, actually Harley Race, Ricky Steamboat, and I wrote a training manual a number of years ago, which is now out of print. But anyway, Ricky will tell you, if you watch WrestleMania 3, everyone says the greatest match on that show was Steamboat and Savage, and it was.
Mm-hmm.
Savage was just anal about talking. I mean, every night, a couple weeks leading up to that, would get with Ricky and say, okay, remember, we're going to do this and do this and do this. And Ricky did. However, he will also tell you that he enjoyed much more working with Flair, all the matches that they had, because the only thing they knew was the finish, and they went out there and created on the fly. And that's the true artistry of our craft, honestly. So, and they're great workers. The great workers of the 60s and 70s and even the early 80s are all guys that called it in the ring. Even I go to some of these shows and I see the guys 3 or 4 hours for the people in there walking through a high spot, walking through a finish. We never had that opportunity. Nor if we'd asked to do it, they'd probably thrown us out of the building. The first time I worked with Ric Flair was in Richmond, Virginia, when he first came into the Carolinas. He was just a year into the business, a rookie. Broke in up in Minneapolis. And they said, hey, you're working with the kid from Minneapolis, one of Vern's kids. And, okay, here's what do you want to do for a finish? And I said this or that. And our first introduction was when the referee called us to the middle of the ring for instructions. And he said, are you going to call the match? And I said, yes. And he said, okay. And we never laid eyes on one another before. So, mm-hmm. and back then, Kayfabe was so much in vogue that, the guys seldom were in the same dressing room and seldom laid eyes on one another until they got to the ring. So all these things that the kids do today were not even, available to us then, even if we wanted to do it that way. So, but that's honestly, Richard, that's the true art and the craft of our craft is being able to create on the fly.
That's right. And you would have mentioned Chris Jericho, how he's so good at, schooling younger guys. And he had commented at one point, he was working with a specific tag team, him and Lance Storm, and, they were trying to get the match together. And the young tag team had no idea what they were talking about. And, Jericho was kind of, apparently, I guess he was shaking his head, like just, commenting that, like you said, young guys literally don't know what they're doing when they go out there.
absolutely. Yeah, I first Lance, when I was in Edmonton, he came up from Calgary to have dinner with me and hang out a little bit. We didn't see each other in a while. I first met those guys when they were the Thrill Seekers. They were both just young kids, and he came into Smoky Mountain Cornette's promotion in Tennessee. And, they were a little ahead of their time, the big bumps and everything. The fans there were more into traditional, classic professional wrestling. And although they should have, they got over it, it wasn't the impact that we were hoping for. But both those guys are so extremely talented. I know Lance and I communicate by email all the time, and he is so much younger, but gets frustrated the way I do in watching some of the craziness that goes on today. We've always entertained, Richard. It's just now that entertainment seems to overpower the actual in-ring product, and that's the problem I see. So many young kids, they watch WWE and they watch Impact, and they just copy what they see, and that's not how you learn to work. All that stuff comes later, and it's a shame because they just don't understand, again, the fundamental. Triple H a few weeks ago had done an interview in conjunction with Bruno Sammartino being inducted into their Hall of Fame at WrestleMania weekend, and was saying himself, that when he broke in with Killer Kowalski, he didn't watch the current crop of wrestlers. He watched Harley Race tapes and Ric Flair tapes from our era. And he said himself, now the fundamentals aren't as important to these young guys. It's more about the big we spots, but the problem with that is there's nothing substantial about that. It doesn't have people come back. And the other problem on the indies is these guys think, okay, I'm doing these crazy bumps, and the boys in the dressing room are getting excited about. Well, that's cool, but the boys in the dressing room aren't buying tickets. And honestly, the indie should be the learning place for your foundation and fundamentals, not to copy what they see in WWE. It comes back to the old crawl, walk, run. You don't start doing the things you see these guys doing. You start somewhere else and try to build a solid match. Again, you can't learn to work in a 5-minute match. When I had my school, most of my guys that I turned out in their first match, obviously I'd put them with someone with experience, and it would be 10, 12 minutes, sometimes 15 minutes, because that's how, short matches you don't learn. I know today a lot of these indie shows are 8 matches, 10 matches, 9 matches, whatever, but they're very short. And I talk to some of the promoters, and when I tell them that when I started HWA, back in the early 90s, I had 5 matches and the show went 2.5 hours, they would have me think I'm crazy. But if you know how to work, you can do that. And taking big bumps doesn't necessarily make you a wrestler or a worker. It just makes you a flyer. And I can see those in Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned pro wrestling in 2013 being entertainment, and when you first started in 1960, I'm sure that's a good fact that pro wrestling was actually, it was a hell of a lot, was considered more of a sport than it is today.
Well, of course, kayfabe was in vogue, and so it was important that we made the fans believe, so we had to believe it. I just told a young man the other day, I said, don't act mad, be mad. When we came through the curtain or through the door or whatever, you believed who you were. You weren't just playing a part. And, you've probably heard this so often over the years, Dusty Rhodes, Roddy Piper, Flair, their promos. Well, that was them. And now I watch some of these kids with somebody else scripting what they say, and that's just how it comes across. And the subconscious, no one thinks of that. But like you say, I've been doing this over half a century, and, subconsciously, I think a lot of the things either ring true or false subconsciously to the fan, to the person watching. They're not. It's not registering on them the way we're talking about it. But when Wahoo McDaniel said he would kick somebody's ass, there was never a question, would he? He damn sure would, you know.